primates or whatever, this is a basic assumption in science, and there is no piece of evidence that can go against that.
How is that? How would that be? How would that not be evidence against it? You haven't explained anything. You've just stated.
No. Let me explain why.
Okay, go ahead.
And this is linked to my previous point, which I was about to make about genetics. So science begins off with methodological naturalism, which is the idea that anything that we look at, we are going to assume there is a natural explanation for it. So when you look at me and you, a blade of grass or Lady Gaga, they're going to assume we're going to have a naturalistic explanation for this. Correct? Do you agree with me so far?
I think the answer to that's complicated, so you carry on.
Okay, but I'm going to make a blanket statement, you can challenge it afterwards, which is,
okay, go on.
That is the very crux of the scientific method, methodological naturalism. So, methodological naturalism means that anything a scientist or evolutionary biologist studies, they're going to assume that there has a natural explanation. Because of that, human beings and chimpanzees, or human beings or something, if chimpanzees or primates didn't exist, right? If something else existed, which was, I don't know, whatever, pigs, whatever, right? We would always be linked to something which is non-human, simply because of that assumption of methodological naturalism. So there is no piece of evidence which can go against that foundational assumption of science.
Okay,
now let me
disagree.
Okay, fine, that's fine. Let me make one more point, which is this. You're saying genetics has added something new, which is exactly what Aaron Ra was saying, which is why I'm disagreeing with both of you at the moment. Genetics, all it tells you is that you have this particular field, just like all the rest of the fields, in which you have an assumption of homology. That's all you actually have. Now, let me give you some evidence for this. Jonathan Marks, he's an atheist evolutionary biologist, and you can check this out yourself. He believes human chimpanzee history is true. He is an atheist. So for him, foundationally, human beings have to be linked to something else in life. Yet he, in his book, which is published by Oxford University, called Evolutionary Anthropology: A New Introduction, right, an alternative introduction, he says about homology. He says, what has genetics actually taught us from the time of Linnaeus, which is prior Darwin, in terms of genetics? He says absolutely nothing. It can give us new information, but it doesn't change the foundational assumption of homology. Homology is an assumption, and genetics doesn't make it into a conclusion. It is still an assumption, and it will remain an assumption whether you bring out your evidence from genetics or anatomy or biochemistry or the fossil record or linguistics.
Okay, so let me respond. I think what Suboor is saying is completely and utterly false. We don't have to assume on naturalism that humans are related to chimps, and I'll explain why. Because there was a popular belief, goes back to the ancient Greeks, I think it was Anaxagoras that came up with it, and it was only disproved, actually same year I think as the origin, I think it was 1859, right, called spontaneous creation. Aristotle believed in this, okay, and it was popular up until the 19th century, where it was considered that species spontaneously were created, you know, out of non-living matter. Right? So on that, now that can be a perfectly naturalistic scenario, okay? You don't have to believe in God to believe in separate creation. You could have a naturalistic separate creation for all the different species, okay? So there's nothing at all about naturalism that forces you into a conclusion that humans and chimps have to be related. They don't have to be related. Now, let me finish.
Sure.
They don't have to be related based off of naturalism, okay? So naturalism doesn't force you into that conclusion.
Sure.
But what forces you into the conclusion is the evidence, okay? That evidence, now notice that Suboor has not really said any specific problem with the evidence other than a general criticism that it's based off of naturalism. But as we've seen...
I said naturalism and then homology.
Okay, but again, you don't have to assume from the outset. You can do a test. The test will tell you. You could say, I start off with the assumption humans and chimps are not related, and then I will look at you could do that.
Okay, right? So tell me.
You don't have to.
Okay,
so
tell me this.
In fact, just to show you how wrong you are. When the first people started looking for hominid fossils, right, they didn't necessarily assume it was with chimps. Okay, some people thought that the orangutan was the closest, right? And so now, of course, I accepted that would be a naturalistic,
and that's homology too.
But my point is, the evidence can check whatever your assumption you start with, right? The evidence can then update what you start with, right? So the evidence could contradict what your belief that humans and chimps share a common ancestry.
Okay,
could easily do so.
Sure. You made 2-3 points. I need to address them now.
Okay. So let me just
you admit that it does start off with an assumption.
Okay, what I'm saying
previously
is...
you didn't do that.
No, okay, what I'm saying is you don't have to start with any assumption.
That's fine, but you just admitted right now that you do start with an assumption of homology.
Okay. When you say you, what do you mean by you?
As an evolutionary biologist or a naturalist or somebody that's looking at this, you start off with the assumption of homology.
Okay. If you're an evolutionary biologist, then you will believe in homology.
Fantastic.
However,
and would you start off with it? Would you start off with it?
If you start, okay, it depends what you mean, right?
Okay.
Let me finish. Let me answer that point. You don't have to start off with this. If you're an evolutionary biologist, you don't have to start with the assumption that humans and chimps share a most recent common ancestor.
Okay.
Would you agree with that?
No, I don't.
You don't agree?
No, I don't agree with that. Because for the first... Okay, you made 2-3 points.
And also, as a naturalist, you don't have to even believe in evolution.
Okay, but you've said 2-3 points which are unrelated, so I need to dissect each one at a point. Okay, so firstly, when you said, as a scientist, you don't need to start off with methodological naturalism, that's... Okay.
No, I didn't say that. What I said was, if you believe in naturalism, you don't have to believe in evolution. You could believe in spontaneous creation.
That's not the point I made, though. That's a red herring.
It is, because what you said was that if you're a naturalist, if you start with methodological naturalism, you have to believe that we have some kind of common ancestry with other animals. That's what you said, and that statement is false.
Because you're making a few points, I'm going to take notes.
That's fine.
Sorry. Yeah, go on.
Okay, so my point was, you said that as long as you're a naturalist, you have to believe that we share common ancestry with other animals. That you have to believe that. Yeah. Right? And that's false. You have to
believe in some naturalistic beginning of a human being, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be with common ancestry with other apes, does it?
Yeah,
it doesn't have to have common ancestry with chimps. So
yeah,
you don't have to have any of that.
But that's the most popular view.
Because the evidence has directed us that way. It wasn't always the most popular view.
Okay, so two points here. So, what would you say about somebody who says that all you need in terms of evidence, all you need in terms of a beginning is just the first sort of spark, the first sort of luck, and from that you can explain a purely naturalistic story of all human beings basically having a common ancestor, right? What do you think of that idea?
Well, you'd need to back each idea needs to be backed up with evidence.
Sure. Right? Okay, now.
And in terms of human-chimp common ancestry, we have overwhelming evidence for that. We have multiple independent lines of evidence. And let me just
that's all based on the assumption of homology. That's the point I'm making.
No, that's the whole point. You say it's based off the assumption of homology, and that is just completely and utterly false. Okay. Right? Now, that's not to say that people don't have assumptions of homology, but the evidence, the tests, they are not based off an assumption of homology. They are independent of what you start off with your assumptions. You could assume, if you went into that lab and assumed that human and chimps were not sharing common ancestors.
Can I have your glasses for a second?
Can you have my what?
Glasses. I'm going to demonstrate a point.
Okay.
Go ahead. Okay. Do you mind if I wear them? Okay. So let me just wear your glasses for a second. I want you to tell me something, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wearing your glasses right now.
Yeah.
Since I'm wearing your glasses, am I affected by the lens?
Yeah, I would have thought so.
And wherever I go, is this lens going to be all-encompassing in terms of what I see?
That's what it was. Well, it depends what you mean by see. If you mean visually, because people use seeing as perception, right?
Yeah.
It just in terms of what you see. No, but hearing is perception. You know, there's a touch is perception. So in terms of your visual outlook, of course, it's going through the lens. Yes, of course.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
Good. Now, as a scientist, the point which I'm making is, whatever field you look at, whether you are a biochemist, a geneticist, an anatomist, linguist, evolutionary psychologist, you have the assumption of methodological naturalism and the assumption of homology. And that assumption is not something you can put aside and look at the evidence independently, because that's not the way that science works. That's the point I was making.
Okay, can I respond? Right. Okay, so the whole point is you can test your assumptions, right? You can collect data and see if your assumptions are correct or incorrect. So again, if you look at the genetic data and you say, okay, if evolution is true, Nano P8 must be the youngest of all the pseudogenes. Now that data comes back to you,
okay,
gives you an answer, and it doesn't depend on what you started with.
Okay, fine.
You'll have to explain how it is. Is it just coincidence that Nano P8 is the youngest pseudogene? Tell me why. If evolution is not true, why is it? Why is it that we share the same mistakes in the same location, and then with the one that we don't have happens to be dated before the split, just like evolution would predict. Tell me how that happens.
Let's do some counterfactuals, so you understand my point.
Okay.
If they make an assumption that something is going to be there and it is there, or if something's going to be there and it's not there, it doesn't make a difference to the assumption of homology, and it doesn't make a difference to the overall epistemic weighing of human-chimp ancestry. That's the point I was making. I'll give you some evidence for this.
Okay,
so, we and chimps are supposed to have a recent common ancestor. So, why is it that if somebody was to use the assumption of homology and then go ahead, why is it that the closest to us in human behavior is not actually the chimpanzee, is actually the ant? Ants have warfare, ants have economics, ants have actually battles. Hang on one second. Sociologically, according to evolutionary biologists, the closest thing to human beings is actually the ant. And there's a book on this, E.O. Wilson's The Social Conquest of the Earth, right? And there's other atheist evolutionary biologists who've admitted the closest to the human being in terms of our social capabilities is the ant. The closest to human beings in terms of our intellectual capabilities is actually the crow, right? Now, those observations which go against the sort of a priori sort of, before looking at the evidence, if someone was to assume if homology is true, then this would be true. Those haven't changed at all the epistemic weighing of human-chimp ancestry, those dissimilarities. Why haven't they? Because the assumption that you begin with is always going to remain an assumption, and the similarities that you see, you're going to say are due to common ancestry. The dissimilarities you're going to say are due to homoplasy. There is no piece of evidence that can undermine that.
Okay, all right. So first off, the statement that humans and ants are the most similar.
Sociologically.
All you said was that because they have. Let me just see. What was the evidence for that? They have warfare.
Okay, let me give you some.
So one at a time. One at a time. One was warfare, correct?
Okay,
correct.
I gave you.
Also have warfare. So that seems like pretty weak.
Okay.
What was the next one?
Okay, one second. So let me explain how sociology works. I think you've made a misrepresentation here. Of course, they both have warfare.
Right.
Except in ant colonies, and this isn't according to me. This is according to the evolutionary biologists who study this. In ant colonies, you have massive warfare where millions of ants go out and they fight. And not only do they go out and fight, you actually have ants which go out and apply medicine to the ants which are actually injured. Now, the complex level of warfare that ants have is totally different to to chimp warfare. Now, when it comes to human and chimp being similar in terms of the sociological behavior, and humans and ants actually being closer than humans and chimps, this is not something I've said. This is something evolutionary biologists have come to the conclusion of. And of course, those conclusions can be revised based on new data, but that's the conclusion that they've actually come to. Now, Henry Guy, he's a atheist evolutionary biologist.
He's not an atheist, you're wrong.
He is an atheist.
No, he isn't. I got a quote from you directly.
Okay.
You're wrong.
He is an atheist evolutionary biologist. He's based here. Okay, we can deal with whether he's an atheist or not later. Okay. Let's deal with his point here. His point here is this.
Yeah.
In his book, An Accidental Species, talking about us, he writes in that book that humans and ants are the closest sociologically. And he's the senior editor of Nature.
No, he isn't.
He's not the senior editor of Nature?
No.
Henry Guy?
Correct.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. because nature doesn't have a senior editor. It has a whole bunch of senior editors, okay? And you're misquoting him. Let me give you a quote from Henry Gee, okay?
Wait, hang on a second.
Okay.
What about the point I just made?
Okay, I'll respond. Let me respond. Okay? Let me respond. Okay, first
You've been jumping around a lot.
Okay, well, so are you, right? Okay.
No, I refute your points and jump on. You jump on without addressing my points.
You haven't refuted.
Can I wear your glasses again? Because until you show me homology, until
let me respond. Let me respond.
There you go.
Right. Okay. Okay.
So these are the assumptions of homology, and once he shows me that scientists don't have this assumption, I'll take them off.
Okay. First off,
he doesn't need your help.
Okay. All right. Okay. First,
I don't need your help.
So first off,
I have God as my helper.
Suboor's wrong about Henry Gee being an atheist.
Henry Gee,
sorry. This is a direct quote from him. I am with the scientists of an earlier age who found that their motivation in advancing the cause of knowledge was to magnify the name of the Creator. Okay? So that was in nature, that was his own words, right? He also says, right, he never disputes that humans and chimps share a common ancestor. He agrees with that.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I never said he doesn't.
Right, and he also agrees that the fossil evidence supports evolution. Agreed?
Based on the assumption of homology.
No, it's not based on the assumptions of homology. It is based off of the evidence that we actually have.
Can I see
Let's
your
just
quote?
go. Hang on.
Can I see that quote?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. You can. There's the source. Check it.
Doesn't necessarily prove he was a theist.
No, agreed. It was 1 point at a time, right? 1 point at a time.
In another place, he said he's an atheist.
Well, that's what I have. I mean,
and that is not clear. That's not clear.
Give me your quote that says he's an atheist.
Well, I don't have it with me right now.
Well,
but listen,
that is why.
What, you want me to memorize every single person?
No, what I suggested, the debate that we had.
Yeah.
What I suggested, the debate we did initially, was that we would swap our statements ahead of time, because then we can check who's misquoting and who's not.
Okay, but him being an atheist.
You didn't want to do that.
Wait, hang on a second.
You didn't want to do that because you said it would be boring.
Right? Hang on. Well, Phil, look. Whether Henry Gee is an atheist or he's not an atheist, how on earth does that change our conversation?
No, I'm just saying. No, agree. I'm coming to the next point. Right. The point is
you need to address these glasses.
Okay. Henry Gee, right, agrees that humans and chimps share a common ancestor. He agrees that the fossil
based on homology.
No, where does he say it's based off homology? He says it's based off of the evidence.
If you look at Henry Gee and all of evolutionary biologists, including philosophers of biology, they all have said the same thing, which is that we have the assumption of homology in our field. And this isn't just about one guy said this or another guy said this. Look, I want you to tell me something, right? If there is a book which is published by, say, a reputable publisher, which has an atheist philosopher of science or an atheist evolutionary biologist who says a particular thing, and then you come here and you say something else different, then should I go with what I have in front of me or should I go with what you have?
You should go with the evidence. That's what you should go.
And the evidence is that when
this is a quote from Henry Gee. Let me read it out to you, okay? They had the 150th anniversary of the publication of The Origin of Species, and Henry Gee organised, or he wrote this about they had this thing to celebrate that in Nature, okay? And this is what Henry Gee said. The articles in this insight testify to the success of Charles Darwin's theory of descent with modification by means of natural selection, carefully detailed in his book On the Origin of Species almost 150 years ago. The most striking aspect of the theory is its simplicity. Given heritable variation, a superabundance of offspring, and environmental change, natural selection must happen and evolution will follow. So he says the assumptions are genetic heritability, variation, superabundance of offspring, and environmental change. That's it. That's the three things that he says. He never says based off the assumption of homology. So he says based off those three assumptions.
Wait, hang on a second.
And also he says this. Let me give you one more quote from Henry Gee. Darwin would have been safe. Okay, hang on. Sorry. Change batteries on the camera.
Let's grab the microphone.
Okay, so this is another quote from Henry Gee in The Accidental Species, a very book that Suboor quotes. He says, Darwin would have been safe had no fossils ever been discovered. It remains the case, however, that fossils provide direct evidence of evolutionary change in our past.
So where does it say he doesn't have the assumption of homology?
Well, where does it? Where he says that natural selection, evolution follows from three things: heritable variation, selection, superabundance of offspring, and environmental change.
Okay, now what you've done is you've actually committed a fallacy now.
Go on.
You've committed the fallacy of equivocation. We are speaking about homology and he's speaking about natural selection. Now, homology is a necessary condition for human-chimp ancestry to be true, but it is not a sufficient condition. For it to be sufficient, you need a mechanism. And a mechanism, in terms of science, can never be proven because of the inductive nature of science. Now, what you've done there is you've said, he is assuming these things, but those are the assumptions of natural selection. Now, Henry Gee and any other evolutionary biologist in the world